Erica, and we are back at the Emerald Coast Science Center for part 2 of our How the Planets and Moons Got Their Names segment. So if you have not seen part 1, please go on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel and check that out. That's from last Friday. This is part 2. So what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about the outer planets. So these 4 gas giants right here. So Friday we talked about Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, and today we'll talk about Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And we'll also talk about Pluto, if there's some Pluto fans out there, and the 4 other dwarf planets. So a lot to talk about today. I will be talking about Jupiter a little more than the other planets, just because Jupiter has a ton of moons and they have really cool stories. So we'll talk about some of those moons. So, and then the other planets have a lot of moons as well, but the stories aren't as interesting. So we'll spend the first half talking about Jupiter and then the second half talking about the other gas giants and our dwarf planets. So you guys excited? Yay! All right, so Jupiter. This is the 5th planet in our solar system and the first of the gas giants or the outer planets. So Jupiter is very, very famous because it is our largest planet. And it is famous for this great red spot right here. So if you guys can see that, that great red spot is a giant storm or hurricane. We have been studying it for 150 years, but it has been glowing for a lot longer than that. So maybe thousands, maybe millions, maybe even billions of years. We don't really know. But this big red spot is shrinking. So it used to be 4 times the size of Earth, and now it has shrunk to about 2 times the size of Earth. So it shows you how much bigger Jupiter is than our planet, because 2 Earths can fit inside of that great red spot, so it's kind of crazy. So I'll show you this again. So here's Jupiter and here's Earth. So you guys can see like how big it is compared to our planet. It is gigantic. And actually 1,300 Earths can fit inside of Jupiter. So that's how much bigger Jupiter is. So pretty crazy. So Jupiter is also has the shortest days. So it takes, oops, it's upside down. So it only takes it 9 hours and 55 minutes to spin in a circle. Earth takes 24 hours. So Jupiter takes a little under 10 hours to spin in a circle. So its days are really, really short. So pretty cool. It is named after the king of the gods in Roman mythology. Jupiter, or Zeus, is his Greek name. And he is a very, very famous god because he was the king and he was in control, and he had these thunderbolts that he would shoot down from Mount Olympus, and yeah, so he was a pretty cool guy. So, but he wasn't always king. So I'm gonna tell you guys a little story real quick about Jupiter and 3 of his moons. So Jupiter has a ton of moons. He has 79 moons, and all of the moons are kind of floating around in his orbit. So 79 moons total, and because Jupiter was the king, he loved to be in love, and he fell in love a lot. And a lot of these moons are named after his friends and his ex-girlfriends, because he had a lot of ex-girlfriends. So this story is about 3 of his moons, Adrastea, Amalthea, and Metis, and it tells the story of how he became king. So a long time ago, the ruler of the Roman gods was named Saturn. His Greek name was Uranus. So he was in power, and he had overthrown his dad Uranus for the throne. So Uranus was still kind of upset about this, and he told Saturn, one day, the same thing will happen to you, and your son is going to overthrow you. So Saturn's like, whatever. So he gets married to this Titaness, so this older goddess named Rhea. So Saturn and Rhea were both Titans. They were from the old race of gods. So they get married, and Rhea is the goddess of motherhood, so she's very excited to have a baby. So she has a baby, and Saturn says, well, you know, this baby isn't going to become God and overthrow me, so I'm going to eat him. So he eats the baby. And then Rhea has another baby, and he eats that baby. Has another baby, he eats that baby. So he ends up eating 5 of her babies. But these babies are gods. Remember, they're Roman gods. They're immortal. They can't die. So they're actually like living in their dad's belly, having like a baby party. So they're all in there kicking his belly and, you know, making a lot of noise. But he's still king. That's what he wants. So finally, Rhea has a son, another son, and she takes the son up into the mountains to hide him. So she gives him to a nymph named Adrastea, which is one of our moons, and Adrastea raises this baby in privacy and in secrecy. So meanwhile, she goes to her husband and she wraps up a stone in baby clothes and gives it to him. and he's not very smart. So he swallows the stone and doesn't even know the difference. So he swallows the stone, thinks everything's fine. Meanwhile, Jupiter is being raised in the mountains by Adrastea, and he grows big and strong, all these muscles, because he is drinking the goat's milk from this magical goat named Amalthea, which is another moon. So he's being raised by Adrastea and Amalthea. So when he turns 18, he decides it's time for him to be king. So he starts dating a woman named Metis, which is our other moon. So Metis is a sorceress. So she's very, very powerful. And she sneaks Jupiter into the kingdom, into the palace, by putting him in beggar's clothing. So she brings him into the palace, and she goes up to Saturn, and she says, I have this potion that will make you inconquerable. So no one can defeat you in battle, and no one can harm you. So Saturn's like, yeah, give it to me. So he drinks the potion, and it does not make him inconquerable. It actually makes him really nauseous. So he starts throwing up and vomiting, very, very powerfully vomiting. So it's going everywhere, and everybody's like, ew, gross. And he starts vomiting up his babies, right? So he vomits up these 5 babies, but they're not babies anymore because it's been 18 years since Jupiter was born. So these babies are adults, right? And they're not very happy that they've been kind of held captive in their dad's belly for all these years. So these babies are named Ceres, Vesta, Juno, Pluto, and Neptune. So those are their Roman names. So in Greek mythology, that would be Demeter, Hestia, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. So we have these 5 very, very powerful gods. So they're all very angry, and they go to battle against their dad Saturn. So this big battle rages between Saturn and his brothers and sisters, the Titans, and Jupiter and his brothers and sisters, the Olympians. And eventually Jupiter wins, and he becomes the new king of the gods. So he divides his kingdom up into 3 parts, which he shares with his brothers. So he ends up becoming the god of the earth or the god of the skies, and then his brother Neptune becomes the god of the seas, and his brother Pluto becomes the god of the underworld. And none of them were allowed to be the god of the earth because that was their grandmother. Gaia was the earth goddess. So she's like, nope, that is my domain. You can divide up the rest of it, but that belongs to me. So Gaia was still the queen of the earth, the mother of the earth, and the boys divided up the underworld, the seas, and the above. So pretty cool. So that's our first story about Jupiter. There's a lot of stories. So, like I said, Jupiter was named after the king of the gods, and the moons are named after his friends and ex-girlfriends. 79 moons. There's a moon named after a goat, Amalthea, but there's no moon named after his wife, Juno. So NASA thought it was really funny, and they sent a probe up there named the Juno probe. So the Juno probe is still up there today, and it circles Jupiter, taking pictures of it, kind of spying on it. So that's NASA's joke, is that they had to send his wife up to check on him. So, and it's still up there. So if you Google Jupiter Juno probe, you can actually see the pictures that she's been taking while she's spying on her husband. So pretty cool. All right. So out of the 79 moons, there are 4 of the biggest moons are called the Galilean moons. So these are Ganymede, Europa, Io, and Callisto. And these 4 moons are very, very important because they were discovered by Galileo Galilei, who was a very famous scientist and astronomer in the 1600s. So they were discovered by him in 1610. And these 4 moons were very special because he was able to watch those moons orbit Jupiter. And he looked through his telescope and he was able to see Jupiter orbiting the sun. So up until that point, well, still at that time, everyone thought that the world was, or our universe was geocentric. So that means the Earth is the center of the universe. And that's not accurate. As we know, the sun is the center of the universe. We're a heliocentric solar system. But back then, everybody thought we were geocentric and everything revolved around us. So Galileo was able to say, no, these 4 moons, they're orbiting Jupiter the same way Jupiter orbits the sun, the same way Earth orbits the sun. It makes sense, but they didn't believe him, so they threw him in jail. So, and then he got out of jail, found more evidence, then they threw him back in jail. So Galileo went to jail twice for his beliefs, but he was right. So obviously, we are sun-centric, we are heliocentric, we are not geocentric, so he was right. So observing these 4 moons, these Galilean moons, helped him to prove that this was true. And it helped scientists today to say, yeah, we're obviously sun-centered, right? We need the sun to survive. So the 4 moons, I have a couple stories about those. So Ganymede was named after a Trojan prince that Jupiter was observing, and he just thought he was a really cool guy and wanted to bring him up to Mount Olympus, so he actually transformed into an eagle, swooped down, captured Ganymede, and took him back up to Mount Olympus to be the cupbearer. So his wife Juno ended up being very jealous because Jupiter was spending all of this time with Ganymede and not with her. So, because they're out, hunting and doing cool stuff, and so she got really jealous. So Jupiter ended up putting Ganymede up in the sky as the constellation Aquarius, the cupbearer. So that's where he ended up. And Ganymede is actually the largest moon of Jupiter. So I have a picture of him on my shirt. So that's Ganymede right there. So he's the largest moon in our solar system, and he belongs to Jupiter. So pretty cool. So then our next moon is Europa. So Europa was a princess that Jupiter, again, kidnapped. So he transformed into a cow this time, a beautiful white cow with fuzzy ears, and Europa went over to pet the cow. And she climbed on his back, and as soon as she was on his back, he took off running and ran so far and so fast that he came to the ocean, and she was trapped. So he started swimming, still trapped, and he took her to the island of Crete, and there were no people on Crete. It was an empty island, so she was kind of a prisoner. So they ended up, after many, many years and many generations, the Minoan people settled themselves on Crete, and they're all thought to be descendants of Europa. And so the Minoans are very famous because they were very, very technologically advanced. A lot of people theorize that our legends of Atlantis might come from the island of Crete and the Minoans. So pretty cool. And the most famous Minoan of all that is descended from Europa is the Minotaur. So if you hear stories of the monster, the Minotaur, he came from Crete. So pretty cool. And that's why it's thought, because a bull brought Europa over to the island, so bulls were very celebrated. So pretty cool. Our next planet I actually have a picture of. So our next one is Io. Io is kind of looks like a big potato, and Io is actually the size of our moon, Luna. So you guys can see on my shirt, here's Io and the moon, our moon. So they're very similar in size. Europa is right here, so Europa is a little smaller than Io, but yeah, pretty cool. So Io, the potato moon, is named after another princess. So this princess was very, very beautiful. I have a picture of her. So she's very beautiful, and so Jupiter fell in love with her, and they started dating, and they were hanging out one day on the beach, and all of a sudden his wife Juno started walking up, and so very, very quick thinking, Jupiter transformed her into a cow. So there's a lot of cows in Greek mythology. So he transformed her into a cow, and was like, oh yeah, I'm just hanging out, me and my cow, just doing stuff at the beach. So Juno knew her husband very well, and she's like, well, your cow is so beautiful, why don't you give it to me as a gift, to honor me as your wife, give me your cow. So he couldn't say no, so he was like, oh, okay, well, you can have my cow. So Juno took the cow, and she chained the cow to a tree and put her favorite watchman as a guardian of this cow, and her watchman was named Argus. And Argus was famous for having 100 eyes all over his body. So he had eyes all over his arms, on his legs, on his hands, on his face, just 100 eyes everywhere. So Jupiter was very, very upset because he wanted his beautiful princess back, right? So he decided he could never rescue her himself. That would be suspicious. So he decided that he would send his son Mercury to go save her. So Mercury goes over with his lute, and he settles next to Argus, who's very bored watching this cow. So Mercury starts to play on his lute, and he starts to play this beautiful music. A lute's like a harp, this beautiful music, and it kind of starts to put Argus to sleep, and a couple of his eyes close, but that's not working. Not all of his eyes are closed. So Mercury says, do you want to hear a story? So Argus is like, yes, please, I'm so bored. So Mercury starts telling this long, rambling story that has no beginning and has no end, and slowly, Argus's eyes begin to close. So slowly half of them close, and then 3/4 of his eyes close, and then all of his eyes start to close. So when Argus is fully asleep, Mercury takes out his magic wand and touches each eye, closing them forever. So Argus was technically bored to death. So he could never open his eyes again, and all of a sudden, Io is free. So Mercury breaks her from the chains, brings her back to Zeus, and after a few more adventures, Zeus transforms her back into the beautiful princess. And meanwhile, Juno is very, very upset that her favorite watchman is now, not able to wake up. So she decides to put him up in the sky to honor him. So she turns him into the constellation Pavo, which is the peacock, to honor him. So all peacocks are supposedly descended from Argus, the 100-eyed man. So pretty cool. So that's the story of Io. I have one more moon story for you guys, and then we'll move on to Saturn. So our last Galilean planet, or Galilean moon, is Callisto. So Callisto is the third largest moon in our solar system. So if you look at my shirt, Ganymede's the largest, Titan, which is the moon of Saturn, is the second largest, and then Callisto over here is the third largest moon in our solar system. So Callisto is very, very pretty. So Callisto, her story is that she was a very, very beautiful princess again. Well, she is a nymph. So we're talking about a nymph this time. Nymphs were kind of forest guardians. So she was a friend of the goddess Artemis. And Artemis in Greek mythology was goddess of the hunt. So she was a very, very good friend of Artemis. And Diana was her Roman name. And she ended up being so beautiful that she caught the attention of Zeus, Jupiter. So Jupiter fell in love with her. And the problem was that Artemis made all of her friends take a kind of a pledge that they would never fall in love with boys, that boys have cooties, that boys are gross, and no boys allowed. So Callisto took this pledge. And that didn't stop Jupiter from wooing her and trying to make romantic gestures, and they ended up dating. So unfortunately, Callisto broke her promise. But what happened was Callisto ended up having a baby named Arcus, and Artemis found out about it and said, well, you can't have a baby in the forest hunting, so you need to go do your own thing. So Callisto ended up having to go into the woods, and she ended up giving her baby away to a family to raise it, because she knew one day Juno, Jupiter's wife, would come looking for her, which happened. So Juno found her and transformed her into a bear. So Callisto became a bear and is in the forest doing bear stuff, and 16 years pass, and after 16 years, her son Argus is a teenager. He's walking around in the woods, and he sees this giant bear, and the bear is his mom, but he doesn't know that. So the bear sees her son and is really excited and goes to give him a big bear hug, and he sees a bear with its arms open coming out to attack. So he pulls his bow and arrow to shoot Callisto, his mom, and not knowing that it's his mom. And Jupiter sees everything from up in the sky, and he stops and he freezes them. So he turns Arcus into a bear, grabs both bears by the tails, flings them around his head, and launches them up into space, where they become the constellations Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the big bear and the little bear. So these constellations are very, very famous because asterisms are smaller groupings of stars inside larger constellations. They are the asterisms of the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. So Callisto becomes the Big Dipper, Arcus becomes the Little Dipper, and the Little Dipper stays in one place while the Big Dipper circles him, protecting him. So if you look up into the sky at night, you'll see Callisto always circling her baby bear, her son, and protecting him from all harm. So pretty cool story. So that is our last Galilean moon, Callisto. So pretty cool. All right, let's move on. We're going to talk about Saturn next. And as you guys know, Saturn is very, very famous for its rings. So let's look at Saturn. So a lot of the gas giants have rings. Jupiter actually has 4 rings. We just can't see them because they're made of rock and dust and gas ice. But Saturn's rings are a little different because they are made of rock and dust and water ice. So they're actually 99% water ice. And that's why we can see them so well, is because they reflect the sunlight. So, and Jupiter's rings aren't made of water ice, so they don't reflect the sunlight the same way that Saturn's do. So Saturn's, that's why they're so visible and so beautiful. So pretty cool. So Saturn is our 6th planet from the sun. It's getting a lot colder out there in space, and it is actually the lightest of the planets. So if you took a scoop of Saturn and put it in water, it would float while all the other planets would sink. So that's kind of a fun fact. So Saturn's rings are very, very famous and beautiful. And, oops, let me turn my notes. Saturn is named after Jupiter's dad, like we said in the story. So his Greek name was Kronos, and this was the god of time and agriculture. So there's a festival called Saturnalia, which celebrates kind of the harvest. So there's lots of festivals that are dedicated to the Roman god Saturn. So Saturn was a very powerful god, and he overthrew his dad to gain the throne, and he had lots and lots of brothers and sisters known as the Titans. So the Titans, some of them looked normal like him, and then some of them kind of looked like monsters. So some of the Titans had 100 heads, some had 100 arms, and some had one eye like the Cyclopses. So those were his brothers and sisters. So Saturn, up until last year, Saturn had 62 moons, and all of these moons were named after either different brothers and sisters of Saturn, or they're named after other characters in Greek mythology. So like the forest god Pan was one of the moons, because he was a shepherd and he would herd other moons around the planet, so they named it after Pan. So Saturn's largest moon is Titan. So I have him on my shirt, he's right there. So he's the second largest moon in our solar system. He's Saturn's largest moon. And what's really cool is that last year, they actually discovered 20 new moons of Saturn. So pretty cool. But the problem is that there's not a lot of Titans to name the moons after. So what they started doing is they started opening up to other mythologies. So some of Saturn's new moons are going to be named after Norse mythology, which was the mythology of the Vikings from Scandinavia. So people from Norway or Denmark or Sweden. And then some of the other moons, these new moons are going to be named after Inuit mythology. And the Inuit people they're the native people from Alaska and Greenland and Canada. So it's pretty cool. So some of the moons are going to be Inuit mythology, some are going to be Norse mythology. So kind of stay tuned. They'll be naming those moons soon. So pretty cool. So that is Saturn. All right. We are going to do Uranus next. Uranus is my favorite planet. So this planet is really cool. It has a really cool story. So in 1781, it was discovered by a British man named William Herschel. And this was a huge discovery because it's the first planet discovered with a telescope. So back in older days, we talked about how Galileo discovered the moons in the 1600s with a telescope, but you could see Saturn and Jupiter with your naked eye if you knew where to look as an ancient person. And with these ancient telescopes, you could see them very well. So they discovered moons, but no one had discovered a planet. No one had that technology yet. So in 1781, Uranus is discovered by William Herschel, and he is very excited. And he wants to name this planet George. He wants to name it Georgium Sidious, George's star, after King George III of England. But the problem is that King George III is not very popular right now because about 6 years ago, the American Revolution happened and King George III just lost the American colonies. So people are not very happy about that. And King George had a nickname, King George the Mad, so they don't really want to honor him with this planet. Plus, it kind of messes up this whole thing that's been going for 2,000 years about naming the planets after gods and goddesses. So they decide that, Jupiter, Saturn, their father and son, why not keep it going? So they decide to name Uranus after Jupiter's grandfather and Saturn's dad, Uranus, the god of the sky. So Uranus is actually a very, very old god, and he is a Greek god. So he is the only planet named after a Greek god and not a Roman god or a Norse goddess like Earth. So Uranus is a very, very cool, primordial god. He's very, very ancient. He's the god of the sky. He sees everything. So pretty cool figure in mythology. But William Herschel still wanted to honor his British heritage, so he decided that he would name all 27 moons of Uranus after different characters from British literature. So he named some of the moons, 3 of them, after characters from Alexander Pope, who was a British author. So some of these moons are Ariel, Belinda. I have one here. There's Ariel, and then there's Umbriel. So those are 2 of Alexander Pope's moons. And then all of the other moons are named after William Shakespeare's characters. So those are moons like Ophelia, Desdemona, Puck, Juliet. So all characters from William Shakespeare. So pretty cool. So yeah, so he honored his British heritage, and all those moons are named after those characters. So they all have stories, but you can read their stories in literature. So it's pretty cool. So that is Uranus. All right. So the next one we are going to talk about is our very last planet, Neptune. So Neptune is the 8th planet from the sun, and it's very, very cold. It's negative 394 degrees, 392 degrees. It's so far from the sun. It's cold, 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 and it's windy. The winds, because it spins in a circle really fast, the winds get up to 12,000 miles per hour. So pretty, 1,200 miles per hour. So it's very, very cold on Neptune and windy. So Neptune is actually really, really far from the sun, right? So it's our furthest planet. So Mercury over here is the closest planet, right here. Neptune is the furthest planet. So it takes us 365 days to go around the sun, 1 year. It takes Neptune 165 years to go around the sun once. So if you were born on Neptune, you would never have a single birthday because it would take so long for Neptune to get around the sun, 165 years, because it's so far. So yeah, so pretty crazy. So Neptune was actually discovered in 1846 using teamwork. So what happened was there were astronomers out there that had telescopes, and they knew something was out there. They knew there was another planet. They just didn't know where to point their telescopes. So they ended pointing them in the direction that mathematicians told them to. So they used math, and they used these mathematical equations to point their telescopes, and they discovered this new planet, Neptune. So Neptune is blue, so they're like, oh, it's made of water, right? But it's not made of water. It's actually made of different gases. But they decided to name it after the Roman god of the sea anyway. So there we have Neptune. His Greek name was Poseidon. So they named him after the god of the sea and storms and horses. So he was a very, very powerful Roman god. So he's Jupiter and Pluto's brother, and he was said to live in the underwater kingdom of Atlantis. So if you hear stories about Atlantis, that comes from Neptune. So pretty cool. So Neptune's largest moon is Triton, which is right here. So we can see his largest moon, Triton, right there. It's named after his favorite son, who, if you've seen The Little Mermaid, that's Ariel's dad, is Triton. So pretty cool. And Triton is the 7th largest moon in our solar system. So pretty big moon. Neptune is also very famous because it is made of a lot of different gases, and you can see there's kind of chemical reactions where the gases merge and they blend. And so two of the predominant gases, the gases that make up the planet more than the others, are ammonia, which is kind of what a lot of cleaning products are made of, and methane. So do you guys know what methane gas is? Hopefully you do. Animals make it, people make it, little boys love making methane, and then they laugh about it. So methane gas is farts. So this planet is made of farts. So it is a very, very stinky planet. So we do not want to go here because it's made of gas, we can't sit down, it smells like farts, and we can't have birthdays. So, and it's really cold. So we don't want to go to Neptune. Neptune's not a very good planet to visit. All right, so those are our 8 planets of the solar system. So we are going to end by talking about Pluto and the dwarf planets. So Pluto, on our map, he is located all the way over here. So he's really, really far away from our sun. So he's really cold. And you can see this is a really cool picture of him from NASA. So he's pretty cool. He was a terrestrial planet. So in 1930, when he was discovered, it was found that he's made of rock and metal. So he's terrestrial like our first 4 planets, just like Earth or Mars. And he is super duper cold. And in 1930, when he was discovered, it was really exciting because an American astronomer found him, and it was the first planet discovered by an American, which is why we have trouble letting go of Pluto, right? So he's the first planet discovered by an American, and they had a big contest to name him. So in 1930, a British girl, an 11-year-old British girl, won the contest, and she named him Pluto after the Roman god of the underworld. So this is Pluto. And what's cool is that Walt Disney liked this name so much that he named Mickey Mouse's friend Pluto after this planet. So pretty neat. So Pluto has 5 moons, and all of the moons are named after underworld mythology. So the first moon is Cerberus. So Cerberus is right here. He is the guard dog of the underworld, the 3-headed dog. And then there's a moon called Styx, which was the river that led to the underworld. And then the 3rd moon is Charon, who is the ferryman of the river Styx. And then Nyx was the goddess of darkness or the goddess of night. That's a moon. and the final moon was Hydra, who was the snake with all the heads that Hercules fought. So the 5 moons are Nix, Charon, Cerberus, Hydra, and Styx. So pretty cool. So those are the 5 moons of Pluto. So what happened was in 2006, other celestial bodies started to be discovered. And scientists said, well, if they can't all be planets, we need to set some rules as to what's a planet and what's not a planet. So what they ended up doing was making 3 rules. So the first rule is you have to be round or nearly round, which Pluto is. The second rule is you have to orbit the sun, which Pluto does. The third rule is that you can't fall into any other planet's orbit. So this is the problem, is that when Pluto is making that ellipse, that shape we talked about around the sun, Pluto actually falls into Neptune's orbit. So this disqualifies Pluto from being a planet, and it ends up being a dwarf planet instead. So unfortunately, Pluto is no longer an official planet, but he goes from being the smallest planet to the largest of the dwarf planets. So we have 5 dwarf planets total. I don't have pictures of these because they're kind of hard to see, because one of them, Ceres, is located right here between Jupiter and Mars in the asteroid belt. So Ceres is named after the Roman goddess of the harvest. It's where we get the word cereal from. Her Greek name was Demeter. So she's located here. And then the other 3 dwarf planets are past here. So they're past Pluto, way, way far away. So we don't have any pictures of them because they're so far away. But they have really cool names. So one of them is Eris, who was kind of the goddess of strife and discord. We talked about her on Friday. She was Mars's best friend. They're battle buddies and they go into battle together. So yeah, so Eris. And then the other 2 dwarf planets, one is named Haumea, and this is where we're starting to pull in other cultures' mythologies. So Haumea was the Hawaiian goddess of childbirth, and then the last dwarf planet is named Makemake. And Makemake was discovered around this time of year, so he was discovered around Easter. So he was named Operation Easter Bunny until he had an actual name. So Operation Easter Bunny. So they decided to name him Makemake after the Rapa Nui god of fertility, because Rapa Nui is the tribe that lives on Easter Island. So that was kind of their connection to Easter. So pretty cool. So those are our 5 dwarf planets. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. I wanted to talk to you about a couple other things we're doing. So on Thursday, we will be live streaming a planetarium from inside of our planetarium here at the Emerald Coast Science Center, and it's going to be on Native American mythology. So we'll talk about different American Indian tribes around America and what they saw when they looked at the sky, the stories they have about the sun and the moon and Earth and Mars and Venus and Mercury, so we'll talk about that. And then I'll actually change the constellations, so you guys will see the constellations that the Lakota saw, that the Navajo and the Ojibwe. So we'll put those 3 cultures in the sky to see their constellations. So pretty cool. And then next Wednesday, I'll be doing a little mini planetarium for you guys at 10 a.m. Central Time. So the Native American Planetarium is going to be at 5 p.m. Central Time. And then on Wednesday, next Wednesday, I'm going to do a planetarium at 10 a.m. Central Time. And we're going to go inside just a 30-minute planetarium to talk about the days of the week and how they got their names. So we'll talk about that because they're all tied to Norse mythology and the planet names too. So pretty cool. So I hope you guys had fun. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you can share a lot with your friends and family. And take care. See you later.